it's okay if you use accommodations and you're not cheating if you take some more time.
Hey everyone, we are Sonia and Nick, and this is Dyslexia Journey. And today we are excited to have part 2 of our interview with Arije Haas. Arije is an education scientist specializing in dyslexia and related topics. As a dyslexic himself, he truly understands and feels for those struggling with dyslexia. His highly successful YouTube channel about dyslexia has almost 34,000 subscribers, and some of his videos have over 1 million views. He also offers one-on-one coaching. Arije, welcome to part 2 of our interviews.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to get into it.
Yeah.
And in our last one, we were doing it more from the dyslexic voices perspective. So hearing about your journey, from childhood to adulthood, being identified, all of that. So you guys can watch that. We'll link that as well. But today we're going to talk more about kind of your current advice and tips and strategies and all of it, because you are a coach and, you are an education specialist, plus you have your own perspective as a dyslexic person. And one piece I wanted to pull in that's pretty specific actually from last time, because we don't always get the opportunity to talk about different languages with people. So, and you are the perfect person to talk to since you speak 4 languages, right? English, Hebrew, Dutch, and German. And you did mention, that you grew up bilingual with the Dutch and German, but so that obviously is an advantage for those two. But, often, at least in the US, and of course we aren't as strong in languages in the US anyway, but there's a lot of talk that like just have dyslexic kids skip the foreign languages. And, that's the hardest thing for kids and things like that. And, we tend to kind of try to say, well, I mean, really it's still more about the accommodations and their speaking and, that we don't necessarily think that it should be thrown out like that. But I'd be curious to hear your perspective on dyslexia and language learning, partly from your own perspective and how that worked for you. Was it more oral? Like, how did the written part come in? And maybe perhaps with tips that you just know from your education background.
Yeah. So when it comes to language learning, I, from childhood, I remember where I had my notebook and I wrote down all the words, and I just had like this word that I need to learn, and I just copied it. And that's what they told me to do, right? And I thought that's how it works. And I got a terribly bad exam results, and I was really upset and went with those results to my teacher. And it's like, and my notes of all the words that I copied is like I copied it so many times that what you told me to do, and I still have a bad grade. So I really, at that point, I really didn't understand how learning actually works and how to do it. And what I should have done is rely more on active recall. So really close the book and see what I can pull out of my memory. Every time you pull it out of your memory, you strengthen the connection and actually start learning it. And then you need to space it out correctly. So you slowly forget the information and then you try to recall it again. And if you do that in the right interval, then it will slowly go into your long-term memory. So that is basically active recall and spaced repetition. Those 2 types, those are the official terms for that. And that make it way more effective. And I slowly stumbled on that. And that definitely improved it. Now, when it comes to different languages, I think, and whether or not people should, learn it when they're dyslexic, I think, if your child wants to, and that is something that they feel like that is something that, brings them something or some joy, then I would let them, It's definitely something that can be really challenging. I would consider what language it is and what how irregular it is. So some languages are terribly irregular, and I wouldn't recommend any of those. So that is, for example, English.
Spelling.
It is very irregular. So you have things like beef, leaf, and chief, right? So you have all those words, and it's written all differently. You have the same sound. Terribly confusing. You all need to learn that from memory. And in, for example, Italian, that is written very much like you speak it. So that would be a good one. Also, the Norwegian languages are way better, and the languages that I know, they're all better than English. Interestingly, now I actually prefer English, but only because technology is so much more developed in the English language. So we have, for example, Grammarly that really is a great aid, and now ChatGPT that can also help you rewrite things, and that is also that does definitely also plays a big role and makes things easier, and that might not be available in different languages, so that's why it's an element.
And this isn't something talked about much either, but I'm wondering what you think about the idea of learning a language just for speaking, so you wouldn't necessarily choose it as your school subject then, where you have to do all the written, because something like English, often people are hearing in TV shows and all that. So perhaps they could pick it up sort of through immersion, I'm thinking, but yeah.
I mean, I think that, intrinsic motivation, like if your child has a drive to do it, I think that's really big. And if that is present, then I would just say go for it. And there's so many elements within, for example, I had this teacher, this English tutor that was that Englishman, and we went over the English literature, and I actually really enjoyed it. And I've learned a lot from these sessions with him. And it wasn't necessarily the correct way to write, but it was things like Dickens and other literature that we read that I actually did find enjoying. And the meetings with him, I would not have liked to miss.
Yeah.
Even as a dyslexic.
The motivation and the particular class or teacher.
Yeah. And the student-teacher relationship.
Right.
Very important.
Yeah, that's true.
It's interesting that you mentioned how English is so difficult. And, for those of us in the U.S., obviously English is, for a lot of people in the U.S., English is their first language. And do you think, and we know that, we obviously know that dyslexia is about more than just reading and spelling, right? But do you think that dyslexia gets, I guess maybe interferes more for people who are going to school in English than say in a
more phonetic,
than in an easier language or a more phonetic language?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's still going to be there, like their effects on the working memory are going to be the same. So that will, affect multiple different areas. But at the same time, if you're able to sound out a word and then you know how to write it, that's incredibly helpful. And for that reason, I think that there's certainly languages that are more suitable for dyslexics and where they would struggle less in certain areas, especially when it comes to writing and also reading. Like if you can rely on the fact that if it's spelled this way, then it sounds this way, then that makes it a lot easier. And there's less confusion when it comes to the all the different syllables and letters that are written.
Yeah. I mean, of course, it could affect identification and in either way, right? Like I think sometimes, I mean, it was a longer time ago too, but my mom was someone who was dyslexic, even though she's never been identified, right? But we know this now. And she was growing up in Finland, where it is phonetic. And I always wondered, I mean, it was such a long time ago, it's hard to say how much was just that there being less awareness and identification in general. But I always wondered a little if she made it like, she was less identified almost because she could sort of just make it because it's so phonetic. So who knows? I mean, it all, of course, plays into our journeys in all kinds of different ways that aren't necessarily like where we can say it's for sure a pro or a con. But it's interesting, though. We don't often have the chance to talk about languages. So it's interesting to hear your perspective.
Yeah. And it's also like, it doesn't go away. So also when I'm in a Hebrew class, I kind of feel like I have the same issues still in a way. Like it's very much something that you grow into and you don't really grow out of it. And and that, yeah, that is still there. But at the same time, the classes that I took here, for example, were really focused on speaking and small classes, and that is also a big benefit if you have that element emphasized, where you're, where you're fine, where you feel like, okay, you can do that. Yeah, those things certainly help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so pivoting a little bit here. So just in general, because you do have this education degree and you do lecture about dyslexia. So I'd be curious to hear, just from like a research perspective, is there any particular nugget of research, whether recent or not, that is sort of like a favorite that you like to share, or something that surprised you, or just what nugget of research would you like to share with our audience?
So one that I find, really cool is it's on stigma and how that works, and basically it connects to the fear that people tend to have of their children being stigmatized when they're giving them a diagnosis. I still hear of parents that are saying like, okay, let's not, because there will be stigma attached to it, and that will be bad for my child, right? So what the researchers did was they had 3 groups, one control group and one group of poor readers without a diagnosis, and one group with poor readers and a dyslexia diagnosis. So one group that just struggled to read, and one group with the label. And they did the measures on emotional well-being and anxiety levels. And what they found was that regardless of the label, the emotional well-being levels were lower, and anxiety levels were lower in the dyslexic and poor readers without a label group. So they were the same in that sense. And the result that they took away from that is that it's not actually the label, but it is the experience of struggling academically that is causing the issues in self-esteem and negative emotions. So if you then take that into account, then what we really want to do is try to prevent excessive amounts of failure, just, compounding. And I think when you diagnose, then at least there is an awareness that this child is different and that it needs to be treated differently. And I think that is really valuable to let parents not make that mistake where they're thinking, okay, not diagnosing will make things better.
That's really interesting, actually, because I think we're familiar with some of the research on stereotype threat around identity, and I think we maybe assumed that being identified as dyslexic would function similarly to stereotype threat, and it sounds like it does not.
Yeah, like, that you also have that research, of course. And there, it is maybe also something to where, if you were to dive into that a little deeper, you will see more signs also of a different coin. I'm not saying that, let's say, there isn't any of it, any stereotype that has a negative effect. I wouldn't say that. But for example, there was another piece of research that I took a look at, and I was kind of hoping for a specific results, because I thought, that would be really cool if that would be that way. I was assuming that if you won't tell like a teacher about the diagnosis, about the dyslexia, about the kids with dyslexia, then also the results when it comes to grading would be different. And they did that research, and that was actually not the case. So they were assuming that there would be a stereotype thing going on that would make it, would affect the results, but it didn't in that case. So I've been more on the side of like, okay, it seems like the effect or the fear that we're having doesn't seem to be too substantiated.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense to me, because there's already, like you said, the failure aspect so strong that there's already, in that sense, there's already a stereotype threat happening, in that they're feeling like people are feeling like they aren't succeeding for whatever reason. So yeah.
And I mean, anecdotally, I mean, based on our daughter's experience and other people we've talked to, it's almost the opposite. It's almost they've experienced failure, and then when they're identified, then it's like, oh, now I have an explanation for why I was failing before, and that actually bolsters their esteem, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, what happens there is this, that often the way you attribute, so the way you explain your dyslexia to yourself, you have like different options when it comes to that. And one unhelpful way you can explain it to yourself is by making it into something that is general. So it's like, me as a whole person is somehow wrong, and that is, and then the diagnosis comes, and the diagnosis is very specific. So it tells you, okay, you have an issue in this area. So then these voices in your head that telling you, you're generally a failure, or you generally have a problem, or you might think to yourself, well, I'm just not that intelligent. Those are quieting down because it becomes something more specific. And I think that is the effect. And and people are they're even so happy that have found this, like that they're that they see, or that they're even, like, if they do it by themselves, let's say they self-diagnose, or they find screening tools and they see this as a solution, and they're like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. And then the fear kicks in of like, okay, if I now get an official diagnosis, then this piece that I have with this finding will probably suddenly be taken away from me. So that is also something that is that is going on.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, you have so much obviously to share here, and you're sharing some of these specifics with us, but I'd be curious to hear with your coaching. We started to hint this at the end of the last episode, but I'd love to hear more about your coaching and consulting. Like, I think you've talked to parents, but, what's the range of sort of services you offer and the people who you can offer it to?
So I mostly work with dyslexic adults, and I work mostly on mental health related issues. So that is the bulk of what I'm doing. Occasionally, there are also parents that I work with, but that is more the exception.
Okay.
And I work on basically the thoughts, so cognitions, so how to deal with them, how to reframe thoughts effectively. And then if you reframe them effectively, then they have an impact on the way we feel. So then we have the whole emotional side, and then we have the behavioral elements. So then you're going into behavioral experiments, for example. One thing that is common, for example, is that dyslexics aren't particularly open about their dyslexia. And what's happening in that occasion is that the dyslexic kind of proves to themselves that it is something shameful, that it is something that is not okay, by actively hiding it. So that is really a dynamic that can cause a lot of negative emotions. And then when you set up a experiment, so you say, okay, what do you think that will happen if you tell somebody, right? So you ask that question, you spell it out, and then you say, okay, like how can we test that? And you basically set up a talk with a friend or with somebody that they respect. And at the beginning, you still also give like a rating. You say, okay, I believe that this assumption that it will be bad for me to tell somebody is, let's say, 80% accurate, right? So that is then the beginning point of the behavioral experiment. And then I meet the next time and with these people, and they find like, oh, well, they totally reacted differently than I thought. And they were a lot more positive about it. And they, had suddenly an experiment or an experience that was totally different. And that then teaches them in a way that it is not something that is shameful or something that is, as negative as they believe it to be. And when they see that other people actually are going, react to it in a more positive way than they thought, then they can also start to be more accepting towards themselves. So that is, one process or one element.
Yeah, you mentioned in the previous episode that you're, I guess, influenced by cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT approach.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it.
Neurolinguistic.
Also, yeah, a little less. Like recently, I got more into schema therapy. So Jeffrey Young has written a book, or several books. He developed it, and that has been a really, really eye-opening in a way that I didn't expect. So he basically goes from, he says, okay, we have these typical childhood experiences that can then lead to patterns that we tend to repeat in adulthood. So Young called this, not Jeffrey Young, but the Young that is deep psychologist, the other one.
Yes.
He called it repetition compulsion, oder in German it's Wiederholungszwang. So the compulsion to repeat past trauma, in a sense. Mm-hmm. And then the question becomes, okay, how are we creating a situation as dyslexic adults that, for example, reintroduces failure? Or if you just scrape by as a child, for example, you might have done that by putting very strict and high standards on yourself, and that creates a lot of pressure. And that might be the way how you survived or how you got through school. But then as an adult, you still do that. And it creates a lot of stress, and you're close to burnout because this pattern keeps repeating itself. And identifying these patterns can be helpful, and then identifying how you recreate them in your life now, so that you know what to avoid. So those are elements, and there also you can look at behaviors that you're doing. You can look at rules of life that you set for yourself and core beliefs, and start questioning them. Like, is this really the case? Am I assuming that this thought in my head is a fact or not? So those are all things that I work with dyslexic adults.
That's amazing. I mean, I can just hear how that's so transformational, because it's both the mindset shift and seeing one's own thoughts and behaviors, and the practical, right? Like with the behavioral testing, and which is how one has to take all those parts in to try to really shift something that's such a pattern. So that's wonderful. So hopefully, we'll definitely put all your information in the description box so people can find you and contact you. So let's talk about the YouTube channel a little more too. So you have this wonderfully successful YouTube channel, which I think it was the last time I mentioned this, so I'll say it again, that it's very, very clear and informative. And so it's just very, very helpful. Each video is so well done. I'm curious probably to hear just some feedback you've gotten about it, and like how helpful that is to people, because often there isn't a lot. I mean, there's still not that many resources, I feel like, for how prevalent dyslexia is. Feedback, and then just sort of like also what you're hoping people take from that, from their work there.
I mean, a lot of time the feedback definitely makes me blush. It's just like, it's so positive, and you're just, it's kind of fuzzy, if you know what I mean. So it's like this community that is all, they're sharing their experience, and I just find it very, wonderful to see, even though I'm frequently overwhelmed by the amount of comments that are coming in. So that is still a thing. But it is, really, really lovely. And I'm trying to more and more, like, I started out more general on dyslexia, and I'm kind of shifting more to adults now, and try to make that more of the focus. Just because that was also one of the feedbacks. It's like, okay, we have things for children, but what's with adults? It doesn't just go away. So you have a big population that is still feeling the effects. I had clients that came to me and I said, like, this is the first time that I actually talked to somebody about this, that I haven't really yeah, that I just slip through the cracks, and that I still really struggle with this. And just being there and like listening to that, it can be already a big thing for a person to open up about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, on our channel, which yeah, we don't have as many viewers as you do, but we are aimed, this content that we put out is aimed mostly at parents, but the comments we get are almost entirely from adults with dyslexia, and often with kind of heartbreaking anecdotes like, oh, I'm 55 and I've struggled with this my whole life, and I was, always told I was stupid, and I'm still struggling. It's really, hard to read some of that, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly is. Like, also, like when I shared my story, and then the feedback that I got from that video, and then the people, when it comes to those comments, I think those are one of my favorite comments are on that video, where they really share their own story as well, and tell me what happened to them, and then you think like, okay, this is what's happening to people, and then you compare that to the awareness, to the attention that it's getting. It just doesn't match up whatsoever.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that. I mean, I don't know if any of us know the answer to this, but any ideas as to why just, dyslexia is so prevalent? Even sometimes the numbers go up to 1 in 5. And I just don't feel like besides the fact that sometimes even teachers and, for identification, it can be slow. I don't feel like it's around like some other things, maybe, autism and maybe an ADHD, I feel like are mentioned more just even within shows, TV shows, or like just around in media. I feel like it's less so.
It's almost ignored
dyslexia
by the media. Yeah. Except occasionally to make a joke out of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I fully agree that it is kind of, well, even if you look at search volume. So if I compare search volume of ADHD and autism to the search volume that we are having within the niche of dyslexia, it's just a lot lower. And then there are a couple of key terms where more people are searching for, but aside from that, it's just not. It seems like people are just equating it with, some difficulties with reading and writing, and that's about it. And the experience that then follows is often, not really seen, or people aren't aware of it, I think. And that then leads to people not really taking it seriously the way they should. Even, people that come to me, they're like, I kind of have this voice in my head is like, that's telling me, well, it's not really to be taken seriously. So that is certainly a thing.
Hopefully that can start to shift somehow, as more awareness just gets out in general. Hopefully people will take it on to also have it come into stories more and into media more. Let's shift as we're getting towards the end of our time with you here. I would love to hear just sort of your top tips and advice and all that kind of thing, maybe to some different groups. So maybe starting with kids, which could be to your younger self. That's often how we think of that, as like, what's the advice we'd give our younger self? And then that's advice that we would give to youth today. What do you think are some, I'm sure there's so many things you could say, but what are some top things that occur to you?
I think take more advantage of audio. I think that's a big one. I kind of refused to do that when I was a kid because I was fighting it. And in general, that's a tip. Okay, you can, if that is your way of like trying to overcompensate or like try to fight it, and then that is okay, but don't rob yourself from the ability of taking in information, because that lack of taking information in just compounds over the years. And so that will be for my younger self, be a little more accepting towards it. And it's okay if you use accommodations and you're not cheating if you take some more time. It's about the content, And also, I would say, don't take grades too seriously. Like, they're often very subjective. That was one of the major things that really shocked me when I got to study education studies. That element of like how accurate they actually are. I did some exams on that specific topic, and like just the knowledge that that your grade is based on the comparison to the people in your class. That's the frame of reference, the other kids in your class. Now, if they're really good, then you're going to look bad in comparison to them. If they're not good and are generally just struggling more, then you will look better. So the what is the ability of a grade to say something really? It really depends on your frame of references. And if you compare yourself to the entire nation, then you get a more accurate picture. But that is, that's not really what we generally do.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an important thing, really, just in education overall, right? Like, what are we trying to focus on, the grade or the learning, and the outcome, or what it is that we're trying to get to next in terms of the goal?
I think that it
can be so hard, though. So I think it's good. You can't say it enough.
Yeah. I think that is also more that something that I communicated to teachers. So I had some teacher training sessions with students and teachers themselves, and that they really take these exams not as like, okay, we're now finishing up the subject, so we have an exam. Now, like, the purpose of the exam is to determine where the kid is at, and then you can basically create the upcoming content based on the results of the exam. That's kind of what the purpose is to determine how you what you teach and where the gaps are and what you need to fill in terms of your teaching.
Right.
But often it's really just the end of a session, and then it's never talked about again, which is really not what we want.
Really, really good point. Yeah.
And well, what about and your YouTube channel is, of course, full of videos about information about dyslexia for the general public. But if you could pick kind of your top, one or two things about dyslexia that you kind of wish that everybody understood.
And the top two that I wish everybody would understand. Well, there's so many things that are really interesting to talk to, so it's difficult to pick one. But I think, in terms of in general knowledge, it's something that affects more than just reading and writing. I think that is really important. I think the mental health side of things is really not really seen. It's not in the picture. But if you then look at like anxiety levels of children with dyslexia, it is just like they at least double in all kinds of anxiety levels. So I think that is really important that more people know. Also, if your child is dealing with school refusal, that is something that is going on. Like, these emotions are very real and they're very reasonable. So I think that is something that I wish people would know. I think there's certainly more, but right now that's what I got.
Yeah. So, just to close out, we want to make sure people can know where to find you. We're going to put all this in the description box as well. So you can, of course, share any final thoughts as well. But anything else you'd like people to know about contacting you for the coaching? I know you offer the first free session because you want to make sure it's a good fit. But yeah, where can people find you?
So just go on my website. There is like a little calendar there that you can click on, and you can just pick a time and date that will fit for you. You will get a Zoom link. I will get one. And then we could just talk. I think that is the easiest way to do it, and the least amount of friction. You can tell me. You don't need to write a big thing. Just tell me in the session itself, or send me a WhatsApp voice message. Also something that would be friendly for dyslexics and something that people can do.
Great. Wonderful. Well, I thank you for all the work you're doing in the world. I mean, it's just so important in so many ways, your YouTube channel and the coaching and, all of it. And thank you for sharing it with our listeners as well.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm happy to do it. And it's always fun to talk to people that are also passionate about it and are spreading the word, so to speak.
Yeah. Thank you.